Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, we heard a lot after the election about how young people had finally made their voice heard, and it seems they want to shout about rather a lot. So what are some of the main issues facing younger people in society, and how do their fortunes compare with their elders? Well, despite low mortgage costs, young people in the UK are struggling to get on the housing ladder. In 1991, 36% of people aged 16 to 24 owned a home. That had fallen to 9% by the end of the financial year 2014. Over that same period, the number of homeowners among 25 to 34-year-olds fell from 67% to 36%. University tuition fees are also often cited as a millstone around the necks of the young. The average amount of debt in England for each graduate is now £32,220. But of course, they won't have to start paying this back until they reach a certain income threshold. After an initial fall in the number of applicants when the tuition fee cap was raised, the sector rebounded quickly, and each successive year has seen record numbers accepted, including those from disadvantaged backgrounds. And young people in Britain are more likely to be in work than many of their European peers. The unemployment rate for 16 to 24-year-olds is 12.5%, down from 13.6% a year ago. That's compared to the EU average of 18%, or more than 40% in parts of southern Europe. So is this a bleak time to be a young person, or have they, in the words of Harold Macmillan, never had it so good? We're joined now to discuss this by Sean O'Grady from The Independent, and Francis O'Grady is still with us. You may have noticed neither is quite a millennial, but they've both plenty to say on the subject. So mean, aren't we, on this programme? Sean O'Grady, age was a big dividing factor in this election, wasn't it?
Yes, it certainly was, and I think that what we found for pretty much the first time is young people registering to vote and then getting out to vote and tending to vote Labour. And many of them were voting Labour, I think, because Jeremy Corbyn put an enormous pile of money on the table and asked them to help themselves in terms of reduction of so-called student debts, in terms of reintroducing allowances for sixth formers and that sort of thing. So I think they were basically bribed. But, you know, I don't mind about that. But I think that in a world where we're becoming a world where each generation has to fight their own corner, if that's what it's going to be, then my generation does have to do that too.
But doesn't that indicate that they felt extremely aggrieved? You know, paying tuition fees, being saddled with student debt, as many of them see it, even though they don't pay it back until they reach this certain threshold. The prospect of buying a home, if that's what you want to do, is now extremely remote. That wasn't the case when I was younger. Well,
it was the case when I was younger, put it that way, and maybe both of us were younger if we think back hard enough. There is an idea abroad that the sort of 60s, 70s and 80s, or 90s for that matter, were a sort of wonder period in which nothing happened that was bad and nothing went wrong. I lived through, as you may have done, the Thatcher era, which was very hard indeed. We had mass unemployment. I've been through a couple of housing booms, but also a couple of housing crashes. I don't want to sound like the Four Yorkshiremen or something, but when you tell young people...
I'm about to get the violins out
when you tell young people today about something called negative equity, where your mortgage was higher than the value of the house, and the mortgage bill every month was bigger.
15% interest rates.
Yes, so we went through that.
Yes, I mean, and isn't that a fairer exposition, if you like, of the situation for young people, if you look at it across the decades?
Well, I've got grown-up children, and I'm not keen on this story of generation wars, often because it's the parents who are supporting young adults and so on, but also because inequality within generations is bigger than any inequality between them.
Yep. But this is looking at younger people from a time, comparing that to today.
And without doubt, this is the first generation that looks like it's going to end up worse off than its parents. We have seen big hikes in housing that do push them out of the housing market, and young people are 3 times more likely to be on an insecure contract, and that very often means low pay too. So, you know, I think that there are reasons why young people did get energised during the election. I don't think it was so much the tuition fees, by the way. On our polling, that was way down the list. It was about decent jobs and a chance
and
of
housing,
a good home.
Right. I mean, you threw up your hands there. I mean, in a sense, hasn't it always been the case that generations say, oh, broadly, we're better off than our parents?
No. For most of human existence, most of what you might call the modern era even, parents didn't, their children didn't expect to do far, far better than their parents. And when they talk about housing, I agree that housing costs in real terms are much higher than they were. There's no doubt about that. But there is a sense of entitlement attached to it. And I think that no one has a right to own their own home and a secondary right to make a vast amount of untaxed profit on the back of it. That's what they're really talking about, and they see what's happened to previous generations. They forget about the hardships, they forget about the sacrifices, they forget about the large deposits and what the building society used to demand of you in the days before 100% mortgages, and they think it was they want a piece of the action.
Can I just, if you're on a 0 hours contract or self-employed, as you know, it's really hard to.
Well, let's talk about employment, though, Francis.
But
let's talk about employment, Francis O'Grady, because it's surely a credit to the government in some way. They don't create the jobs, but that actually more young people are in work, certainly compared to our European counterparts, average. Not Germany, for example, but certainly all the southern European countries.
Yeah, well, I think everybody wants to see everybody having the chance of a job. But I think that, again, the conversation has moved on. We launched our Great Jobs agenda this week.
So that's been priced in, you mean, that everybody just assumes there won't be high youth unemployment?
Well, I think people are now saying, you know, having a job in and of itself shouldn't be the limit of our ambitions. We want everybody to have a good job, a secure job, and the kind of job that you can raise a family on, that you can afford to live a decent life.
Isn't there also something different in terms of accessibility now? I mean, we look at education and tuition fees, you said wasn't exactly a high priority. Accessibility is much better too, compared to when we were students. Do you think, though, people have taken that on board? I mean, if you're a young person, you will only see what is around you at the time.
No, they haven't taken it on board at all. It was very hard in the old days, if I can put it that way, for people to get into a university. We used to have things called polytechnics as well, and FE colleges, and even those were unusual to get into at once upon a time. Once upon a time, 50 years ago, only 1 in 20 18-year-olds, usually boys, got into university. So you double or treble or increase the size of the further education, higher education sector in 20 years or something, and you expect no one to pay for it. You have to make a contribution for it.
And isn't that the realpolitik also in terms of material wealth, technology, opportunities to travel and work abroad? All these things now are more accessible to more young people than they were 20, 30 years ago.
But isn't the real issue also about what's going to happen when they become pensioners? And if we haven't got occupational pension schemes, and if the state pension isn't high enough, and if we haven't got homes to sell to pay for social care, what then?
Well, there you go. The point is that people my age and older are in a situation where, yes, they may have built up some assets, they may have built some wealth up in their home and so forth, but as soon as they get dementia or as soon as they get some other long-term illness, they will lose the lot. Where's the fairness in that?
Yeah.
You know, and the other thing is that every single thing you can think of, apart from housing, from cars, from computers, entertainment, meals out, anything you can mention is miles better than it was 30 years ago.
Social mobility.
Sean O'Grady, thank you very much. At least I said goodbye to the right O'Grady.